Welcome into this week's episode of Three True Values. We are wrapping up our season preview series. We're breaking down each conference. If you haven't checked out the ACC, SEC, Big 12, also we have breakdowns on the AAC, the Big East, the Mountain West and West Coast Conference. If you haven't seen those yet, go back after you listen to this. Be sure that you get through the rest of those throughout the next week because we are getting very close to the start of college basketball. It's all exciting. From here on out, the anticipation just continues to build. And to help us reach the pinnacle of this anticipation, in the second segment, we're going to have Anthony Broome here to talk to us about Michigan basketball. They have Dusty May at the helm now. A lot of new faces. What can we expect from that team as the season gets started? But first, here in this first segment, we've got to take you throughout the Big Ten, walk you through all the rest of the teams and what you should expect from them. And then in the final segment of today's show, we'll be talking to Nick Schultz of On3. He's kind of our A10 and Missouri Valley Conference expert. We'll talk to him about those two conferences, what we can expect from them. Will they be more than a one bid league? That's always the conversation that we have with him each and every year. Excited to do that. Excited to continue talking college basketball. And it is more important now than ever. If you're a fan of the sport, you like getting this analysis, walking through the results of the past week, the biggest storylines that are going on, please be sure to like, subscribe, whatever it is, however you interact with this podcast. You know, I know some people listen on Apple Podcasts. We are putting it up on YouTube. We are starting to build a brand, trying to post clips, trying to get people more engaged. And the best way to do that is to have it shared, whether you talk about it to your friends, who you know also love college basketball, or you share it, you like it, subscribe, all those things that kick it up in the algorithm, whatever it is, would be very thankful if you would do that so that we can just continue to grow this and keep it rolling with an upward trajectory. Also, plenty of content at On3 that I've been working on. We've got conference breakdowns there if you want to read about the different rosters. You prefer that format a little bit more in depth. You're able to kind of look at it and reference back to it more than you can in audio version. Please go check those out. Bracketology coming up, NBA mock drafts, whenever we feel the need to update those. And then just stories throughout the season that I will have. We'll be highlighting some different players, different programs, and also got two important stories. I think one is up now. The other one is either up today, sometime this week is up. Can't remember what the official date on that one's release is, but they'll kind of break down what is it about the transfer portal that teams want to do. What is the thing that is making teams successful? What is the thing that's making it hard to succeed for these programs as they figure out how to use this new era of college basketball? NIL, of course, plays a huge role in that as well. That is touched on a bit in the piece too. So with all of that wrapped up, we can now get into the conversation. We're start talking about the Big Ten, which, despite not really having top end like national title hope teams, has got a lot, and I mean a lot, of really good basketball teams. Borderline conversation about most NCAA tournament bids of all time. We'll get into that as we roll through. But UCLA, right there at the top of the list. Rebound year. Got to be a rebound year, and I think it will be. I've been high on William Kyle since he transferred. I know he's started to get a little bit more love as of late. Sky Clark comes in, Tyler Bilodeau, another underrated piece that they get there, Eric Daly. I think what they were able to do at UCLA, though, was mix it in. They got Trent Perry, a freshman coming in who could play some. Lazar Stefanovic, Dylan Andrews, Sebastian Mack, Ademara, Brandon and Devin Williams. I mean, they bring in a good collection of returners, some transfers, freshmen. I like this UCLA team. I think Mick Cronin will get things back rolling there in Los Angeles. Indiana, man, Indiana hit big. There's no question about it. They get Umar Ballo, Cannon Carlisle, Luke Goody, Landon Hatton, excuse me. They bring back Malik Renault, Mackenzie Mbako, Gabe Cups, and Trey Galloway. Anthony, like Bryson Tucker, the freshman, comes in. I think that this Indiana team is loaded. Big year for Mike Woodson. We'll see what he's able to do with that team. Illinois has got two foreign players that are going to come in and I think make a big impact. Kasparis, Jacko, excuse me, if I try to pronounce this right, Jacku, Kasparis. I'll get it during the season, I promise. Right now, I'm struggling with it. But then Tomislav Ivicic, brother of Zvonimir Ivicic, who is now at Arkansas, played at Kentucky and had a little bit of a breakout last season. Tomislav, a little bit different of a player, more interior focused. But they also bring in transfers, Kylan Boswell, Kerry Booth, Trey White, Jake Davison. I like pretty much all of their transfers, and then bring back Ty Rogers and Dre Gibbs, Lawhorn, who I think can have an impact as well. The Illinois team just going to be good. The more you watch Brad Underwood coach and build these rosters, I think he's just going to be a consistent picture here. Will Riley, can't forget to mention him as well, added to this roster. So just a lot to like. If you're an Indiana or an Illinois fan, a lot to like, a lot to be excited about. The other team out west, though, in Los Angeles, they're being coached by Eric Musselman. And Eric Musselman had a down year last year at Arkansas. Of course, he ends up making his way out to Los Angeles. USC also had a down year last year, a surprising one because they had Bronny James, they had Isaiah Collier. There were a lot of high expectations around that program, Kobe Johnson as well. So what was the issue? Can it be solved by Eric Musselman's methods? And we've seen that a lot of transfers is not always the system for success. He had been the exception to the rule until last year. Things did not go his way. Now he brings in, Harrison Hornery is the only returning player. Brings in a couple of freshmen, but really this team's going to be about, St. Thomas, Desmond Claude, Terrence Williams, Rashana G, Chibuzi, Agbo, Josh Cohen even. I mean, there's so many guys. I mean, we could list the entire roster if we want to list the transfers who might have an impact. But it's about establishing that pecking order. And I think if there is a coach to do it, it's Musselman because he's got that G League experience. But it's going to be the question for this USC team. Now, Purdue, a team that probably people wonder, why do I have them so low? So now's the time that I get to break that down because when I'm writing, it's hard to get fully in depth, especially when they're as low as I have them. But I just think if you look, losing Zach Edey, losing Lance Jones, losing Mason Gillis, that's three big, important pieces. What did they replace them with? I mean, they're really, I know that Mason Gillis had kind of started to fall out of the starting lineup, but still an important role player on this team. And Braden Smith, yes, he's back. I think he's going to be fantastic. One of the best point guards in the league. Trey Kaufman-Wren, I think, has another level of his game that he can reach. Fletcher Lawyer will be good once again. You're asking a lot of who? Camden Hyde, Will Berg, Daniel Jacobson, the freshman coming in. Who is replacing two-time National Player of the Year Zach Edey? And I know that it doesn't have to be a one-for-one replacement, but I just feel like this roster is missing what was its identity for the last 2 years. And so there's going to be an adjustment period. So I'm interested to see how they handle that adjustment period. And Lance Jones, I don't think should be overlooked either. A scoring guard. A guy who helped them a lot on the perimeter. So I think they've got some questions to answer more than maybe people are asking of them at this point in the season. Michigan State, hey, they added 2 transfers. What do you know? I mean, I kind of hope, uh, just personally, I hope Frankie Fiddler is just outstanding for this team, for no other reason than to just like prove the point that hey, the transfer portal, you don't have to go, you don't have to be Eric Musselman, but go fill the position of need. I mean, because now look at this Michigan State team, a lot more filled out. Um, they'll be hoping for breakout years from Xavier Booker, Cohen Carr, Jeremy Fears. Um, Jaden Akins is back. I think that's huge for this team. Jason Richardson, that's a guy that I'm looking at as a potential breakout on the wing for Michigan State. I really like his game. But I just think that this Michigan State team is kind of where they've been the last couple of years. Let's wait and see what Izzo can do with this team. I think that's where we're going to be for a while, at least with this program. At least this season for sure. Rutgers. How about Rutgers? You bring in Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper. I mean, yeah, I've got you above the NCAA tournament line just based off of those 2 players. Then you go out and you get Tyson Acuff. I like him. My question for Rutgers is really, what are they going to do with the bigs? They don't have any dominant interior presence. I mean, there was one point where I was looking at potential lineups and I thought to myself, would they try Ace Bailey as a stretch 5? Like, what is the goal if they get to that point? And I'm interested to see what the big man rotation for Rutgers looks like because you're losing Clifford Omarui. And let me tell you, that's a big loss. That's one that's going to be hard to overcome. Rutgers, I think at the end of the day, Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, as long as they both perform to the expectation level, I think this team is an NCAA tournament team. We'll see how far they can be carried by that duo. Maryland, they bring back Derek Queen. Big fan of Derek Queen. I like this group that they brought in from the transfer portal as well. Rodney Rice. I like Sultan Miguel. Jacoby Gillespie. I like him as well. And then you look down the list and you start looking at, Derek Queen is the incoming freshman. Julian Reese, who I was thinking about just a second ago as the returning big man. Bring back Deshaun Harris-Smith, Jordan Geronimo, Jahari Long. Another good mix of players that I really like. I think maybe they can have a bounce back season. Oregon. Can we just get a healthy Oregon season? That's all I'm asking for. They bring in TJ Bamba from the transfer portal, Supreme Cook as well. Bring back Keyshawn Bartholomew, Nate Biddle. Can he have a healthy season? That's all we need. I mean, Kwame Evans and Mookie Cook. Can we get both of them healthy and on the wing? Jackson Shellstad at point guard. Can we get a healthy season from Oregon? That's all I'm asking for. Dana Altman, I know that's all he's asking for because the guy can coach. He can build a roster, but man, he just needs some things to go his way. Jamari Phillips, another freshman there who could have an impact as well. Wisconsin, as we keep rolling through, bringing in Cameron Hunter from Central Arkansas, Xavier Amos, John Tanji. We know they've got a ton of returning players from last year's roster, so AJ Storr is out, but I think they did an okay job at replacing that production that they'll probably lose. I'm interested to see what Wisconsin looks like this season. Ohio State, of course, they bring in a new head coach. Michi Johnson makes a return to Ohio State, an interesting move this offseason. Micah Parrish, I think an underrated transfer addition. Quez Glover also, like as a backup guard, I think he can offer you something there. Sean Stewart, we'll see. Aaron Bradshaw, both of those are upside swings to me. Just throw 2 guys in the front court and see if they can become what they were supposed to be. Bruce Thornton, though, is going to make this team go in that backcourt, returning for another season at Ohio State. Plenty of depth pieces, too. Like this Ohio State team, because they went the interim route and then promoted from within, they were able to retain a lot of guys. Most of these teams that we're looking at with a new head coach, we're talking about having, 1, 2, 3. We'll talk about Michigan in the next segment. 3 returning players. Washington has a new head coach. 3 returning players. But they were able to bring back quite a few players. They got 7 guys back from last year's roster. I think that's encouraging if you're Ohio State. Like I said, we'll talk about Michigan in the next segment. But Washington, Zoom Diallo, how about a splash? Getting that freshman to come in under Danny Sprinkle. Tyler Harris, very under the radar NBA draft type guy on the wing. Really interested to see what he's able to do in this team. Great Ostabor, of course, follows. I'm excited to watch this Washington team. I think that they could be an underrated team. DJ Davis, another guy on the wing that just I got my eye on. I think he can be really good. I think a lot of these guys have the potential to figure it out. We know Danny Sprinkle has gotten it figured out pretty quick everywhere that he's been as head coach so far in his career. We'll see if he can do it again here in the Big Ten. Nebraska, they're looking to return. I mean, there's been no question left by Hoiberg there. They want to win an NCAA tournament game. They got close last year, of course, made the NCAA tournament, but still have not been able to win one. They bring back Bryce Williams and Jawan Gary. Unfortunately, I mean, just brutal news. They lose Rink Mast. But Barricay, Bullion Tunsil, Braxton Maya, Andrew Morgan, Gavin Griffiths, Connor Essigan. I think if they can get the best out of these players, I think they've got a real shot. I think one thing that they did really well, I got to give Hoiberg and his staff a lot of credit, is I've talked about some of these teams that I have question marks about. And a lot of times the question marks surround this idea of, okay, who did you lose? All right, who did you bring in? Those are the two questions. And of course, you're going to have some guys who are on the team who grow, they become better. That's going to happen. But how did you replace the players that you lost? And I think that Nebraska did just about as good of a job as anybody of finding not only like for like replacements, but maybe getting like for like replacements, but like being able to build depth through that. I think that they found like two guys who could be able to replace somebody. So now you're talking about creating depth where when there's a substitution, you've got more like for like swaps that you're able to make there. I really like what they've been able to do with this roster. Northwestern, this is another one of those teams. I've talked about it a few times during the preseason here as we break down these conferences where I'm looking at it and I've got them low just because, I mean, look, how many teams have we walked through? Like 15 who I've got on this, on the bubble or in the NCAA tournament category. So, I mean, how good is Northwestern going to have to be to get in? But they bring in Jalen Leach and Keenan Fitzmaurice. I think those are decent transfers. They bring back so much of last year's roster. I think ultimately losing Boo Buie is going to hurt them, but man, I think they're going to be a really good team, but just might not be able to survive the conference slate. Iowa, almost in the same category. I mean, just a ton of returning players, so you want to like them. You know that they've got, Peyton Sandforts comes back. That's huge for them. They're going to be a really good team, but not sure they have enough to compete in the conference. Minnesota, they bring in quite a few transfers, but again, I like some of the transfers. They do bring back Dawson Garcia, Mike Mitchell, among others. But man, even though Brendan Rigsby can be a good piece for them, Frank Mitchell, Trey Edmonds, not sure if they can just hang in this conference. And then Penn State, they too, I'm interested by Penn State. What's it going to look like year two under Mike Rhodes? Because yeah, they bring in some transfers, but they bring in some freshmen. They're trying to build. You can see what they're starting to build there. Ace Baldwin, of course, comes back for another year. Nick Kern, Zach Hicks, DeMarco Dunton, Puff Johnson. I like this group of players, and it's going to be interesting to see. I think there's no doubt in my mind, and we'll head to break after this, that this is the deepest conference. I would venture to say it is likely the deepest conference that I have seen in my experience covering college basketball. I really think that, even if, say, 3-4 of these teams that I like just tank, for whatever reason, whether it's injuries or doesn't mesh well or coach goes sideways, whatever happens, you're still talking about 15 incredible basketball teams. So it's going to be tough, no matter what, to break down this conference. We're going to go through the entire season talking about it. We'll talk about Michigan in depth next with Anthony Broome. Stay here on Three True Values. Welcome back into Three True Values. We've got Anthony Broome from The Wolverine, which covers all things Michigan football and basketball. So any content you want, go check them out. But today we're here to talk about the preseason for Big Ten basketball, specifically about Michigan, who hit the jackpot on the coaching carousel this year. They get Dusty May, the guy who everyone wanted. He was brought up for every big school coaching search that happened this offseason. So what's it been like? You know, you've got turnover there and a whole new staff to cover. What has it been like this offseason to see what they've been up to?
Yeah, part of it is, without throwing too much shade to Dusty May's predecessor, I think the thing I've been struck by the most is that he is so organized. He is so thorough. There's no secret the last few years, Michigan's whiffed on some big name transfers like a Terrence Shannon, like Caleb Love, where, the guys are either committed or silently committed or close to dropping. And once you try to get the transcripts through, you don't have your ducks in a row there, and it kind of falls apart on them. Michigan obviously brought in 6 transfers, and they didn't even, if you didn't clear your transcript first, you weren't visiting and you weren't certainly going to be committing to the program. And I think of the guys they got, and I might be jumping ahead here, everybody who took an official visit did wind up transferring to Michigan. So I think for me, the legwork has been striking. The organization has been striking. And then May is just a really transparent guy who, there are questions about what they have on this roster and how it'll all come together, but there's like a pliability in what he does too. And there are going to be things that are retained from what he did at FAU, but you really get the sense that they're willing to be flexible based on their personnel, and they're going to mix some things up too. But Dusty May, I mean, it's, when the hire was made, or even, when we're starting to put together these hot boards and stuff, when Michigan's in the hunt for a coaching search, I get what the questions were. Right. FAU, was it, the big thing was the Final Four run, and was that fool's gold? Because it, part of it had to do with, a 16 seed winning over a 1 seed, and all of these things had to happen. But when you start to get to know the guy, and you start to get to know some of the people who worked with him at FAU, who are now at this Michigan program, it's not hard to see why they were able to get there. And again, he's basically working out of a broom closet at FAU. Now you go to a place like Michigan, the resources are just so much more vast. I don't know how good Dusty May is going to be, but I mean, he's about as high floor a guy as I think they could have possibly brought in. And I think the ceiling could be pretty high too.
Yeah, I do think that structure, that organization that you talked about, is one of the major reasons that people who followed closely what he was doing at FAU had that confidence that he was going to make the jump, no matter who it was that he ended up landing with in this cycle. But Michigan ends up with him. And, I wasn't going to go here, but you touched on it a little bit. And I do want to kind of address it because I think it's something that people are really fascinated with Michigan the last few years. Did they get the admissions issue resolved, or were they more vigilant in avoiding issues with the admissions department? Which one was it more so this offseason with Dusty May?
I think of those two scenarios, I think a lot of it is being a little more vigilant about the process and knowing you could get in. And again, I think there's kind of this misconception that there's just this department that's called admissions that rubber stamps yes or no based on getting guys in. My understanding is that a lot of it comes down to the deans and the individual colleges within the university. And I'm not making excuses for them, but again, it just seems like from a process standpoint, Juwan Howard was more, hey, I need you to come play for me. Like Caleb Love's case, I need you to come play for me. We'll get you through and it's no big deal, yada, 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 right? And I remember, one of our coworkers at the Wolverine, Chris Ballas, was basically kind of telling people, hey, I would maybe tap the brakes on getting excited about this because I don't know if he's actually getting in or not.
Mhm.
And I think that's pretty telling about, again, so much of that last regime was just, well, let's throw things at the wall and see what works and all that type of stuff. I think that really when it comes down to, and again, I'm sure that part of Dusty May's pitch in order to come to Michigan was going to be, getting some of the NIL stuff figured out, getting some of the transfer portal stuff figured out. But, if you had not known about what had come previously the last few years, you wouldn't have really even known that there was ever some kind of admissions issue because I think the 6 guys they brought in, one, they're all going to probably play
Mhm.
pretty big roles on this team. And they didn't settle on anyone. They got the guys they wanted to, which I think is, just speaks to, not only administratively how they got that sorted out, but also, acting with conviction and finding guys that fit and acting quickly.
Yeah. And now moving on to the floor with what Michigan is going to be this year and obviously beyond, because there's structural things that we'll see that will play out over the rest of Dusty May's tenure. But I think that the thing that everyone's going to be watching is going to be that 2 center setup. They've talked about wanting to use Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf on the court together, which is going to be really interesting to see because if you would ask me about this about a month ago, I probably would have likened it to the Timberwolves having Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert. Well, now they've decided to blow that up and move on with a different model. So there's really no active comparison for what they're trying to do here with these 2 centers. So early on, what have you seen? What have you heard about this system that they want to run?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's watched FAU and Vlad Gold knows that he is your post up guy, right? Like he's going to get you 16 and 6, 7, 8 rebounds a night. And then, the biggest questions with Danny Wolf. I mean, I think when people ask about how successful that can be, it really comes down to one, like defensively, how does that look for him? Guarding guys away from the basket, maybe a little bit more, but that'll be as successful as Wolf is able to shoot from distance and stretch the floor and make teams respect that. And it sounds like he's done a really good job with that. Dusty, we talked to him at Big Ten Media Days, and when you're talking about point guards and ball handlers and positionless basketball, he says Danny Wolf's as much of a guard as any other guys that they have. So they seem to really be high on his ability to be versatile. It does seem like he's, obviously we haven't got, before he came to campus, we didn't know him a ton, but it seems like he has slimmed down a little bit to maybe play a little more of that stretch role. But it's going to be fascinating because, there have been times where 2 big lineups have worked to a certain extent. You saw, Purdue with Purdue's done it before.
Mm-hmm.
Michigan's done it before to not so good success when Hunter Dickinson and Musa Diabate were there. But,
Yeah.
You get the sense that this can work because I think Danny Wolf is, a really good, well-rounded offensive big man. So they've been working on getting his game a little further away from the basket. It seems like the early returns on that have been positive. And, on a team of so many unknowns, one of the things that they really feel like I think they have to hang their hats on at the moment is that this 2 big lineup has been working, and it has been something that they've liked behind the scenes and in practice. So I think it speaks volumes about how they're able to kind of tinker and fit this together. But right now, I think that's much more of a known commodity for them than it might be to the rest of us.
Yeah, for sure. And then I do think the one benefit that they have going into the season is even if it doesn't work overall or situationally, because there's going to be times where you play a team that might have 4 guards on the court. They've got such a big collection of wing players. You've got a Will Cheddar. If you wanted to go really small, you could play Namari Burnett, somebody like that around there and still have enough wings to fill out those remaining spots on the floor. So I like the versatility. I like the depth of this wing room. Who are the guys who have kind of emerged and seem like they're going to be the go-to guys? Maybe it's those 2 guys who I just talked about returning or the new guys on the wing there who have really stood out so far.
There's been a lot of hype for Roddy Gale, a guy who has shot much better than he did at Ohio State last year. He was dealing with a wrist injury. I think some other things banged up there. Dusty really likes his ability to kind of be physical and play downhill, get to the free throw line as well. I think he's a guy that has a chance to be, one of the bigger questions right now with them is who's going to be that guy that is your bucket getter late. I think maybe he's the closest thing they have to that right now. Roddy Gale's a guy that I'm high on. I think they're really high on Sam Walters, the transfer from Alabama, as a guy that, again, they're going to be something that they like about this roster that they've built is that, like you said, the two big stuff can be something that works. There can be nights where they go smaller, and maybe Sam Walters is playing a little more with Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf's playing a little more center. I think that the biggest thing for them is they've given themselves options. Will Cheddar is one of the few guys that returned from last year's team, shot the ball extremely well last year. On like a respectable amount of volume. Wasn't just chucking up like 5, 6 3-pointers a game, but I thought played well, brought some good energy there. I think he certainly factors in to the forward rotation, and maybe he's a small ball 5 in some sort of look too. I don't know. They have options there. Yeah, and I think with some of these, Reuben Jones is another guy that I think they have a lot of confidence in him, not only being, he's going to probably one of their first guys off the bench, maybe the closest thing they have to a backup point guard right now, but he can guard 1 through 4. He's kind of a scrappier guy that's going to bring some energy off the bench, and maybe there's a scenario where he's in the starting lineup. We'll see what it looks like, but I think the last year the wing position was they just didn't really have him. I mean, Namari Burnett was the closest thing they had to it last year, and now you can play him a little more at the 2. You can play him at the 3. There were times last year where he had to play backup point guard because they didn't have one, especially when Doug McDaniel was out. So I like there's so many different directions they can go with, where last year I felt like they were kind of pigeonholed with what they had. So a lot of buzz for a lot of those guys.
Yeah. I think the biggest question mark, though, that remains to be answered, that's going to have to play out on the floor, is the point guard spot. Trey Donaldson, really the only guy with any college experience who is a point guard in that, kind of old school term that we use. Now, a lot of coaches have kind of gone to calling it lead guard. You talked about the versatility, how they view Danny Wolf as a guy who can bring the ball up, can do different things with it. So I do think Roddy Gale, that guy who you described as a bucket getter, you want your bucket getter to have the ball in his hands. So sure, it makes sense that he could take over some of those pseudo point guard minutes, some of that role. But Trey Donaldson behind him, it's really, Justin Pippen, the freshman, is he the other point guard style player, I think, on this roster? And hey, his brother just recently signed an NBA deal, so maybe you get that right off the bat, but I wouldn't count on it. So point guard, where are they going there?
Yeah, I think Justin Pippen might be a little more of a long-term play with them. He's been banged up recently, it sounds like, which has led to, I'll tell you, a guy that's blown their expectations out of the water right now is LJ Kaysen, who was a signee with Dusty at FAU. Probably more of a secondary guard at the moment, but they've been extremely, I think he's going to play a lot, and I think he's going to play early. I wouldn't be surprised if he's one of the maybe 2 or 3 first, those first 2 or 3 guys off the bench. Pippen being banged up a bit, a couple other guys being banged up here and there has kind of led Darrell Brooks, who was Mr. Basketball in the state of Michigan last year, to get some early time. And again, so much of it this time of year is some guys are banged up here. Maybe a guy comes down with a cold and he's not at practice, but I think some of those opportunities to get some more run for Darrell Brooks in practice has been huge for him. Like Pippen, I think he's probably more of a long-term play, but
right.
They like what they've seen out of these young guys. I feel like just in terms of the guards, though, Kaysen is a guy that they want to. I think he's going to play, and I wouldn't be surprised if he got some point guard experience kind of on the fly this year as well. So I don't know that I'm comfortable enough to say like he's the backup point guard. I think for all intents and purposes, Reuben Jones is kind of going to be that early on, but I think that he'll work in, and at some point, I wouldn't be surprised if he is that guy. But they think they have something there in terms of maybe a long-term piece that could have a role this season.
Yeah, for sure. And with all that said, all that we've talked about, the many moving pieces, everything that's so in flux with what this team is actually going to look like on the floor, what are the expectations from the fan base year one? Because we know this is a program that's used to really, really good basketball. So They know that they've got their coach. Obviously, they're going to be patient with him to a point. But what are the expectations?
I think a lot of people are in wait and see mode. I think that, when lest we forget, I mean, when Dusty May took this job, he had to flip this entire thing. And we didn't know. I mean, we had no idea what this roster was going to look like. And for it to come together the way it did, where, you pull a Trey Donaldson, you pull a Roddy Gale from your rival in Ohio
Mhm.
State. We figured they'd get one of the FAU guys there. They got Vlad Gold, which is maybe the highest floor guy they could have gotten for what they needed. I think a lot of people expect them to compete for an NCAA tournament spot. And with this, the expanded Big Ten now, this could be a 12, 13, 14 bid league. I don't think that's crazy to say with the level of, so much was paid to, what the caliber of football programs coming to the Big Ten. I mean, the way that those four schools round out this conference, I mean, makes it an incredibly competitive basketball conference now. So I think a lot of people have them probably right on that bubble. I think KenPom's got them at like 18 and 12, 19 and 11, something like that. And that feels about right. But um, I do think the floor for this team is being on the NCAA tournament bubble. And I think that, I mean, the ceiling, would I be surprised if this clicked and they found themselves in the second weekend of the NCAA tournament? I can't say I would, because I like the pieces they have. And I like that, so many of these schools or these programs that have had to rebuild through the transfer portal, you're getting kind of these 1 year stopgap type of guys. And, there's a couple of those guys on this roster, but there feels like a nice mixture of veterans that can kind of come in and bring some experience and leadership, and some nice little long-term plays as well. I mean, Sam Walters has 3 years of eligibility remaining. Roddy Gale has 2. I think Trey Donaldson has 3. So
Mhm.
not only do you have the ability to maybe compete for a spot in the tournament as early as this year, you're kind of setting the foundation for what next year could look like as well. And Dusty May said right off the bat, like, we are not treating any of this as a rebuilding year. We know that success in year one can only set us up for what comes after that. Because, we're still kind of waiting on them to find their stride with high school recruiting, which I think is still going to be the basis of what Michigan wants to do.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, putting expectations on it, yeah, I that's the standard that they're holding themselves to, is that they want to be competitive right away. And they think they can be in a league that I feel like this Big Ten is going to be as wide open as it's ever been. So it's going to be a lot of fun to see and track, because they have a pretty good non-conference schedule too. So you take it little by little. It could get rocky early on, but um, every night out in this league is an opportunity to build some momentum, get a signature win. And I think that this group is far more equipped to do that than these last few have been.
Yeah, you talk about the depth of the Big Ten, and I already last year was starting to consider, when is the Big Ten going to break that Big East record of most teams entering the tournament? Well, then you go out and you add USC, who gets Eric Musselman. You get UCLA bouncing back under Mick Cronin. You get Oregon, who's just had horrible injury luck, but obviously very good program under Dana Altman, and Washington, who brings in Danny Sprinkle, who's one of the hottest up and coming coaches. So no extra nights off added to that schedule. And who can forget that Rutgers also went out and landed 2 of the best players in the freshman class. So just bump up that level of competition just a little bit more. But before we get you out of here, I got to get your pick. Early preseason selection for who's going to win the Big Ten regular season title.
That's tough. I mean, it's hard. It's hard right now, like, to pick against anyone but Purdue. But when you have an 18 team league, if the question is Purdue or the field, I'd probably lean towards the field. And I've seen some buzz for maybe UCLA sneaking up
Mm-hmm.
and maybe winning this conference right off the bat. Can never rule out Illinois, even though Brad Underwood has just decided to just go as weird as possible with building his rosters and figuring it out from there. But yeah, it does feel like Purdue is still sort of the class of this thing. I still think Matt Painter is the best coach in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting though. Like I said, it's about as wide open as, I've got the KenPom page pulled up right now, but you've got Illinois, projected as the second place team with an 11-9 record in the conference, and all the way down to like spot 16, you've got these schools within 2 games of each other in terms of the
Mm-hmm.
projections. So we have no idea how this is going to play out, which is going to be a lot of fun. It could also be nerve wracking, especially if you're an East Coast team that has to go west for a weekend or a stretch of games. But that's the new Big Ten now, and I think it's going to be a lot of you're going to get a lot sorted out in the regular season.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a lot of fun. I think we're at a point where you don't have to worry about that 500 conference record. That's still probably going to be good enough to get you into the NCAA tournament. As we get closer to the season, why don't you let everybody know where they can follow you, where they can keep up with your work?
Yeah, you can follow me over at thewolverine.com. Always, we have a very bustling, but you think Michigan's a football school. Our basketball community is amazing as well. And our basketball coverage, I think, is about as good as anyone in our market. So definitely check us out over there. I'm on X, the app formerly known as Twitter, at Anthony T. Broome. Always like mixing it up with people over there as well. So we'd love for you to join and be part of the conversation, but I'll have the chat anytime. And I'm much more looking forward to covering college basketball this year than I have been the last few seasons. So it's an exciting time to be a Michigan fan.
All right. Well, thanks again for joining the show. Welcome back into Three True Values. We've got my friend Nick Schultz from On3 here to talk us through the A10 and the Missouri Valley conferences, two conferences that he knows well. If you follow this podcast, you know that every preseason we bring him in and we talk about these conferences, specifically what Loyola is up to. I know we're going to touch on that quite a bit, but
right
there is plenty in the A10 to talk about. 6 different teams receive votes for first place in the preseason poll. One of those we were talking about a little bit before the show is a questionable decision, but 5 of those teams definitely deserving of a spot atop this conference. We've got VCU, Dayton, St. Joe's, St. Louis, and Loyola Chicago all up in the running to lead this conference. So just go ahead and start us off. Who among that group do you think has the early advantage coming into the year?
Well, I think St. Louis is the most interesting story in the league because, I mean, they have almost an entirely new roster and it's a Josh Schultz system, and they have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, my guy, Robbie Avila. Like, that's going to be a fun story in and of itself. VCU getting 14 first place votes was interesting because they got Shoga back, which was huge. Looked like he was leaving. He comes back, and now they can build on last year. Loyola Chicago did a great job rebuilding. They didn't lose any rotational players. They did good work in the portal. Des Watson back is really important as well. This top 5, all those teams that received first place votes, and Duquesne was the other one, picked 8th and got a first place vote, which is interesting. But that top 5 feels almost interchangeable to me. Like, I think any one of those teams, if there's a year for the A10 to get back to getting those multiple bids, this is it, because the top 5 there, that's a really good group.
Yeah, getting multiple bids is going to be one of the big talking points, I think, around the A10 this season, because as I've gone through some of these other conferences and broken it down, I look at the Big Ten and I say, man, that Big East record of teams in the tournament in one season might be in jeopardy. I look at the SEC and I say, that record might be in jeopardy. I look at the Big 12 and I say, man, that record really might be in jeopardy. So if you've got all those teams from the big conferences, the conferences that have invested so much from those power groups, you know, they just have so much money that they can throw at it. What does that leave in the mid-major conferences? The ability to get multiple teams into the field. It's going to take something special from one of these teams and a really good non-conference record to even boost you up high enough to get in that conversation. I do think the A10 has what it takes to do that, though. You talk about Josh Schultz coming to St. Louis, the resources that he'll have there. And then you talk about Loyola Chicago, how they've bounced back in this last couple of years since they arrived in the A10. And then Dayton. Dayton's the one that I think is interesting because they still are getting a lot of respect, and rightfully so. They lost so much off of last year's roster
hurts
to those schools that we're talking about in these power conferences that just had more NIL. You lose Kobe Elvis, you lose Kobe Brea. I mean, those are 2 big losses that I think put them behind the 8 ball as they try to compete with VCU and these other teams that we've talked about coming into this season. But you mentioned it there. Loyola got a lot back. They were able to kind of fend off some of the sharks that were circling. How much is that going to help them this year?
Well, I was watching a guy like Miles Rubin, who's a freshman, who was raw, who you saw the talent. He's the name I'm watching as the portal window goes along. Now, I don't know if he had any offers or anything. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying he's a guy I'm watching. Like, okay, that's a guy, if I'm a power school, maybe I'm watching. Keeping him was huge because he's that defensive presence down low. Preseason all conference this year as a sophomore. He's the one that I'm sitting watching. I was nervous about. Just maybe someone could come along. They got a really good blend of their returning group. They got Jaden Dawson back as well, who I was just going through the quick facts. Remember, he set the program record for most threes in a game last year. So you got your shooter back. It did work in the portal. I really like the Jalen DeLoach edition. I think he brings that power conference experience from Georgia, and it's a return to the league for him as well. Yeah, losing Alston Norris and Adelacoon hurts, but you got a group of newcomers here, and Drew Valentine's been red hot on the recruiting trail as well. I think with the guys they didn't lose any rotational players, which is important in the current portal landscape. Holding on to your rotational players is huge. Mm-hmm. And then you go in and get guys who can come in and give you a boost. I don't know if you could have scripted a better offseason for Drew Valentine and the Ramblers because of it, just a perfect storm like this. It was pretty well done by the staff. And that was with turnover on the staff too. He lost some assistants.
Yeah.
So I'm really high on Loyola this year.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think rightfully so. I think I would probably had them in this top 3 here of teams.
I was surprised when they fell to 5th in the preseason poll. I was surprised by that. I'd put them top 3.
Yeah, I do think VCU probably is number 1 with what they bring in. They actually were able to pull a couple of high major guys down into the mid-major ranks to contribute to this roster. But I think you look at this conference in particular and what it's going to be this year. It's going to be fun to watch because we've got some really good up-and-coming coaches. You've got Ryan Odom. We talk about Josh Schultz. We talk about Drew Valentine. Anthony Grant is a guy who has just year after year built this Dayton team into something special. And now you talk about some of the investment that's going to be coming into the conference, and I think we would not be doing a service to the A10 if we did not talk about the biggest addition of the offseason, which is Adrian Wojnarowski at St. Bonaventure. Yeah. And I know obviously his role will kind of take in effect and maybe have more impact down the road in years to come. But how big was that to just have that much attention be put on the A10?
It got brought up at Big Ten Media Days, Fletch. I was standing there. It was just a couple of us with Kevin Willard from Maryland. And I walk over there and they're talking about the East Coast and the investment. And they bring up that he brought up that Woj is at Bonaventure. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, we're at Big Ten Media Day. And we're talking about the A10. Like, and I mentioned, like, yeah, I went to Loyola, by the way. So as an alum, I'm sitting there going, well, they got Woj. Like, that's huge. And I think you're going to see that pay dividend, like you said. It won't make, not so much this year, next year, year after. But that is important for a team that's picked 10th in the preseason poll. And I think having Woj's connections like that, just bringing a spotlight onto Bonaventure, first of all, is going to be important. And he was doing that already at ESPN. He was donating to the collective. He was repping his Bonnie pride on social media. But now that he's working for them with his connections in the agent space and the recruiting space, this is going to be a really interesting conversation to have over the next year, 2 years. I think you look maybe 5 years. How is the conversation going to shift around Bonaventure? And again, how does that benefit the league as a whole then? Mm-hmm. Is anyone else going to be making these types of moves? You never know, because GMs are becoming more popular in the college sports landscape as a whole, but especially basketball.
Yeah, that general manager role is something that I've talked to quite a few people. It's becoming so important. It's so much more than it used to be, managing travel, making sure that players get where they're supposed to be. Now it really is kind of making sure you can construct the roster, making sure that you have all the resources that you need. And a guy with those connections is going to be able to get a lot of that done for sure for the Bonnies there. Do want to kind of shift over now as we've kind of run through the A10 to the Missouri Valley, where we have a lot of change, a lot to talk about there. Drake loses their head coach, Darian DeVries, to to West Virginia, excuse me.
That one surprised me.
It
didn't surprise me, but it surprised me. You know,
that move in particular, I guess, might have been a little surprising to me.
I think it was where he went that surprised me. I just didn't expect West Virginia to make I don't know why, it just didn't come up on my radar. But when it happened, I'm like, okay, I can see that. But
it
at
makes
first,
a
I'm
lot
like,
of
that
sense.
surprised me. Yeah, it does. And then Tucker goes with him. Like,
Yeah.
okay,
That was kind of the reason that the timing lined up so well was with
Right.
NIL. Tucker can go to whatever high major position and get himself kick started as he obviously tries to make it into the NBA over the next year by proving that not only can he do it at the mid-major level, he can do it at the high major level as well. But then you also lose kind of that Cinderella Sycamore story. Josh Schultz, he's heading to the A10. He's going to go coach at St. Louis, takes Robbie Avila with him. So that's another just big loss. They lost plenty off of that roster. And you look up, and it might be Bradley's time. We've talked about Bradley for the last few years now. It feels like they're always second fiddle. They're always right behind that group of teams that's competing at the top of the conference. They're just waiting to break through, and they have these good moments. But now it feels like their conference. It feels like they should be the odds-on favorites to get that automatic bid from the Missouri Valley. And I don't see any reason they can't with the amount of transfers that they brought in to complement what they have. I really like this Bradley team. I think they can compete to get into maybe not quite the at-large conversation, but right on that bubble.
3 guys on the preseason all-conference team, including Duke Dean, Player of the Year, and you do have Brian Wardle back as the coach, which, I mean, Brian Wardle knows this league very well. I mean, he was one of those when it comes to St. Louis. He's one of those now up there with Ben Jacobson at UNI, where in St. Louis, don't count them out. I remember when they were the 5th seed and won Arch Madness, and then they went and did it again the next year. Like, don't count out Bradley. I think this is now, like you said, the path is there with all the changes in the league. But I'm looking at the preseason poll and I see Northern Iowa at number 2. I'm never, ever going to count out Ben Jacobson. If I ever count out Northern Iowa, Ben Jacobson's the coach, that's a signal something's wrong, because you can never, ever, ever count him out. I have all the respect in the world for Jake. He was great to me during my time as a student reporter covering the Valley. He is just a fantastic human being, a great coach too. Even down years at Northern Iowa, you get down to St. Louis to Arch Madness, they're there on Saturday.
Yeah.
So that's the only team. Well, not really the only team. I mean, Murray State got a first place vote too. That's another program, great mid-major program. But I see Northern Iowa as the biggest threat to Bradley. If Bradley can fight off UNI, it's there for the taking. But this could be another one of those years at Arch Madness. Who knows what happens? Because this is going to be, talk about the A10 being open. The Valley's always open.
Yeah,
it's not. The preseason poll is going to look nothing like the final stage.
Right.
It never does.
No. And Murray State, you touched on there, I think is one of the most interesting teams because we've seen them kind of move up the conference standings since they got in there. Of course, they lost their head coach, obviously no John Morant anymore, but
right.
They come in and they've kind of built things back up to where they need to be to contend in the conference a little bit. It does kind of remind me of what Loyola Chicago is doing in the A10. They made that jump. Now Murray State, they come in, they get a first place vote this year. I think that they can really compete at the top of this conference with what they have now.
Well, and you have a coach who's familiar with the program too, that you brought in Broome, because you lost McMahon, but you brought in Steve Broome, who coached at Murray State before.
Yes.
So now you have some, right. So that helped lay the groundwork when you're jumping leagues. Now I remember when Valpo joined the league, when Murray State was in the running, they took visits. I remember I reported that at the time. There's a world out there where John Morant played in Missouri Valley Conference. That is one of my favorite stories to just go back and look at. Like, there is a world where Murray State was in the Valley sooner, but they got in this round of realignment and they had just been steady rise, which is what you want, because jumping from the Ohio Valley to the Missouri Valley, there's a jump there. Yeah. And yes, it's a mid-major league, but you still it's a step up there. And Murray State's handled it well with this linear path that they've gone on. They got Jacoby Wood is going to be a stud this year. He's another first team preseason all conference. That they're going to be another one that's kind of just hanging around there. Maybe they can play spoiler a couple times, be that 3 seed, maybe the 2 seed going into St. Louis. I love talking about the idea of Arch Madness in October, by the way, but that's just in the Valley. That's what you're looking at. Is you've got to look at what's your seed going to be going into Enterprise Center. Murray State's going to be right there as a team to watch all season long, I think, because with where they're at, year 3 in the Valley, year 4 in the Valley, they're there. They've arrived. Now let's see what they can do and make some noise.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of have to talk about Arch Madness this early in the year, just because
you always do.
That's what this conference is. It's a one bid league. That's the conversation. It's not just who's going to win the regular season title. That's all fun and good when we're talking about the high major conferences. You know, who's going to win the regular season? All right, who's more built for a tournament style? We can have those different conversations, but here in the Missouri Valley, you have to build a team that can win a tournament. There's just no way around it. That's going to be the most important thing you do. And so prepare yourself throughout the season. Sometimes that doesn't always mean having the best record. That means preparing your team for that environment, making sure that everyone is hitting their stride and hitting their apex when we get to March. So,
and that's why I always turn to Ben Jacobson, because March that's Ben Jacobson's time. And by the way, the Valley's going to be, that's more focus is going to be on St. Louis soon, because Missouri State's leaving the league.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to be losing that one of your pillars of the league is going to be leaving for Conference USA. It was a football related move, but it's still going to have a major impact on the basketball side.
Right.
So now where's the Valley going to go next? I have no idea. There's more realignment going on with the stuff out west. And now there's the reports that Northern Illinois could be in consideration for the Mountain West. I can tell you there's a lot of mountains in DeKalb. I've been there. There's no mountains up there. I don't know why the thumb just went up. Apparently I just did a thumbs up and triggered Zoom.
Hey, Zoom loves the thumbs up.
It really does, apparently. But if you're the Valley, is it going to be thumbs up? Depending on what happens with Missouri State? I don't know. So this year is interesting. It always is. What move do they make next? Are they going to bring one team in? Are they going to go to 14?
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea. But the Valley is in an interesting position with the ongoing round of realignment going forward.
Yeah. How about a Missouri Valley Conference with no teams from Missouri? That would be
that's what
you're
looking at. That's what you're looking at right now.
That'll be quite an interesting storyline. But
the only tie to Missouri you have right now, once Missouri State leaves, is conference headquarters is in St. Louis.
Yeah, Arch Madness. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and you've got Arch Madness. Right? That's it. Like it's crazy how much has shifted. I mean, like you can go back to when Creighton left. You can go back to when Wichita State left. I go back because you short term with the way realignment's gone. We've written a lot about it.
Yeah.
When Loyola left, they added more teams, which there was rumor they wanted to get to 12 anyway. Yeah. Loyola left, that kind of sparked it. Now you're losing Missouri State. It's another pillar of this league. And I mean, Loyola was only in the league. They joined in 2013, 2014. Missouri State's been in the league a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to adjust for that now. I don't know what's going to happen next with the Valley. I really don't.
No, it's all up in the air, especially when you're one of these mid-major conferences. But hopefully they'll still be around next year, so we can have another preview of that conference.
Yes.
Thanks for coming on today. Thanks for talking through these two conferences. And why don't you let everyone know where they can follow your work, whether it's on social media or on 3.
Well, Fletch has to edit my stuff at On3, so I guess I'll just go ahead and plug our stuff at on3.com. It's a fun time of year in college football too. Like we're going to get into that overlap here. What are we, 3 weeks away, 19 days away from the overlap of football and basketball when we're just watching everything. And it makes those Friday nights really fun too.
It does. Together. It does make Friday nights really fun.
Yeah. On3 is the place. It's a fun time to follow us on 3 Sports on social media. I'm at Nick Schultz _7 on X, Twitter, whatever we're calling that app now. This is going to be such a fun time of year, man. I love this little window in here when we got all the sports coming together because the NBA is starting soon too.
Yeah. I mean, so many sports for us to follow. And like he said, keep up with it at On3 anytime you're there. Thanks for tuning in right here on 3 True Values.